Just recently, Starbreeze announced Armour 2.0 in Dev Update 8 as part of Operation Medic Bag, an overhaul of the armor system in Payday 3, which is planned to release in December later this year. There's quite a lot to go over with this announcement, as it's an overhaul of the armor system as a whole. As it currently stands, there are 5 armor types in the game: Standard, Light Ballistic, Medium, Heavy Ballistic, and lastly, the Adaptive Armor. With Armour 2.0 though, these pre-made armors will be removed and replaced with customizable armor frames. Before I go fully into talking about Armour 2.0, do note that the system is not fully finished yet, and they themselves say that while the system itself will look more or less as described, numbers will likely change following testing, so do keep that in mind. With armor frames, you'll be able to choose between adding chunks of normal armor, the adaptive armor, and the new armor type coming to the game, Shield. The final name for Shield hasn't been decided upon yet, so there's a good chance it'll be called something else when it finally releases in the game. I'll be honest, I like Shield as a name, but maybe that's my Halo bias showing. Shield plays like Payday 2's armor, albeit in chunk form. It won't take any permanent damage to its chunks like the adaptive armor does, but it will also have the ability to regenerate its chunks even after they fully break. As strong as it is in the sense that you can be infinitely regenerating chunks of shield armor, the chunks themselves are very fragile, having a 0% damage reduction. For reference, adaptive chunks have a 5% damage reduction at the moment, meaning that it will be even more fragile than the adaptive armor. I'm concerned about how shield chunks will play alongside the hardy skill, as with 2 seconds invulnerability upon your chunks breaking and being able to infinitely regenerate your chunks, it's definitely going to be overpowered. I assume that the skill will be changed to not apply to shield chunks, but it's still something I'm worried about as it could be an issue if it's not addressed. With the armor frames, you'll be able to pick and choose what armor chunk types you have in it and what order they'll be in. Yep, that's right. With armor frames, you're not just limited to only having one type of armor in the frame. Similarly to how the already existing armor types work, you'll be able to unlock the different frame types as you level up. It's worth noting that the chunk types themselves will not be restricted, so you'll be able to use all the chunk types at any level. You will, however, have to purchase the armor frames in any additional inventory slots if you buy multiple of them, but you'll be able to customize the frames for free. As for the armor frames themselves, there's 4 different options available with 1, 2, 3, and 4 chunks, all with different movement speed penalties, ammo capacities, consumable slot amounts, and passive abilities. The 1 chunk frame gives you no movement speed penalty, a 20% decrease to your maximum ammo capacity, 4 consumable slots, and for its passive ability it gives you an extra 20 health from using first aid kits. The 2 chunk frame gives you a light movement speed penalty, neither a decrease nor an increase to your maximum ammo capacity, 3 consumable slots, and for its passive ability gives you 1 more of the tool you have currently equipped. The 3 chunk frame gives you a medium movement speed penalty, a 20% increase to your maximum ammo capacity, 2 consumable slots, and for its passive ability replenishes 1 throwable if you have none for longer than 10 seconds. The 4 chunk frame gives you a heavy movement speed penalty, a 40% increase to your maximum ammo capacity, 2 consumable slots, and for its passive ability, it prevents all armor damage for 3 seconds if you use an armor repair kit or an armor bag. I think the passive abilities are a little hit or miss. The 1 and 4 chunk frame abilities are very obviously meant to buff your survivability, but the abilities for the 2 and 3 chunk frames aren't really related to survivability at all. I'm not exactly too sure what abilities they could give to these chunks that revolve around survivability, so I do understand to a certain degree why they gave these seemingly random abilities to those chunks. There's also the fact that the lower plate frames have more consumable slots than the higher plate frames, which is incredibly confusing to me. Just for reference, all armor types can currently carry 3 consumables by default. With these planned changes, 1 plate will be buffed, being able to carry 2 extra consumables, and 3 and 4 plate will be nerfed, being able to carry 1 less consumable. 1 plate is popular and incredibly strong at the moment because of 2 things: Clean Slate and Adrenaline. Making these 2 playstyles better with buffs to consumable slots is just baffling, as they're strong enough as is and really don't need to be buffed further. It also further disincentivizes using the higher chunk frames, because on top of the already existing penalties that they have with long armor regeneration times and slower movement speeds, you won't be able to carry as many armor repair kits as you would on the lower chunk frames. It's a pretty big fumble in my opinion. Lower chunk armors have dominated the game for so long, and we're seeing a buff to them while we're seeing enough that isn't really warranted to the higher chunks. Something interesting to note is that the regeneration speed and the amount of downs a frame has is at 0 seconds and 6 downs by default, with the stats being changed by what armor chunks you use on the frames. For every normal chunk, it will decrease the armor regeneration speed by 1.5 seconds and take away 1 down. For every adaptive chunk, it will decrease the armor regeneration speed by 2 seconds and take away 2 downs. And for every shield chunk, it will decrease the armor regeneration speed by 3 seconds and take away 2 downs. While the minimum amount of downs you can have is 1 with this new system, you can still have negative downs. If you use 4 chunks of adaptive or shield, you will have negative 2 downs on the back end, and using 4 to 2 days to give yourself an additional down will put you at negative 1 downs, but will still leave you only having 1 down in an actual heist. Another interesting thing to know about the armor frames is that they regenerate all of their chunks at once. For example, if you have 4 chunks of shield and they all break, if you wait for it to regenerate, it will regenerate all 4 of those chunks all at once. This is something I'm a little bit on the rocks about, as I fear that being able to restore multiple chunks of shield at once will be overpowered, due to just how much armor you'd have available after waiting a few seconds for it to regenerate. Though I do suppose it's counteracted by how long it would take for the armor to regenerate if you had multiple chunks of shield, so maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill on this one. To coincide with this new system, there's also been some sneaky changes hidden in the blog post, which, while being shown, aren't commented on, and you have to have a keen eye for detail to notice them. Firstly, the damage reduction on the chunk types are being buffed. Normal armor is being buffed from having a 25% damage reduction to having a 30% damage reduction. Adaptive armor also sees a similar 5% increase, going from a 5% damage reduction to a 10% damage reduction. Similarly, the regeneration speed of the chunk types are being buffed. Normal armor is now a flat 1.5 seconds per chunk, compared to its previous regeneration speed of 3 or 2 seconds per chunk. You may be wondering, why is it 3 or 2 seconds? Shouldn't it be a consistent speed? Well, the first 2 chunks that an armor has adds 3 seconds to the armor regeneration speed each, and then the third and fourth add 2 seconds each. Yeah, it's kinda weird, and I only realized it when I was looking at the stats of the normal armor types. Moving on though, the adaptive armor is now a flat 2 seconds, compared to its previous regeneration speed of 2.25 seconds per chunk. And lastly, Adrenaline inadvertently gets a pretty sizable buff with these changes. On top of the buffs to consumable slots on the 1 chunk frame, the maximum amount of downs you're able to have will go up from 5 to 6, which can be obtained if you use a normal chunk on the 1 chunk frame alongside Fortitude Aced. This of course buffs the Adrenaline skills on Yielding, Super Physiological and Walking Tall, giving you more survivability on Adrenaline setups. Using a single chunk frame also makes first aid kits restore an additional 20 health, making them much more impactful for restoring Adrenaline. I can get why they didn't comment on this, as it's a blog post about armor and not Adrenaline, but I think it would have been neat to mention it, as it helps elaborate on why the 1 chunk passive ability is the way it is. I know I've been critical and negative of Starbreeze in my previous videos, but I've always held the idea that if things are bad, I'll say they're bad and critique them, and if things are good, I'll say they're good and praise them. And you know what? I think they deserve the praise this time around. They took the criticisms, they took the complaints, they took the videos made by no-names on the internet about armor, took their time, and truly created a best of both worlds type situation. It's genuinely a great improvement upon the armor system, adding layers of depth and customizability to builds that surpasses what the series has previously done with armor. It's not completely perfect, with it having a few interesting decisions here and there, but it's all things that can be worked out before it gets released in December. When I'm harsh on Payday 3 over certain things, I want you to know that's because I know they can do great things with this game, and this is the best example we've seen of it yet. Everybody wins here though, normal armor players, adaptive armor players, and even players who don't enjoy normal or adaptive, but will enjoy playing with shields. This bodes incredibly well for the future of the game going forward, and I hope we'll see similar types of overhauls for other systems, where the core is kept, but just added upon it to make it more enjoyable for more people. That's about it though. I'm looking forward to seeing Armour 2.0 drop in December. Hopefully Starbreeze could drop on the 6th, it would be a really cool birthday present. Joking aside, I actually am pretty hyped, and I'm looking forward to seeing just how much variety in build types we're going to see with the addition of shields especially. I'd like to know what you think of Armour 2.0 though. Do you see yourself having fun with shield chunks and customizing your armor, or do you think armor should be left as is? I'd love to know, so drop a comment about it below. As usual though, I've been Cookie Dough, and have a good one.